Okay, so this episode of the House Culture Podcast is a little bit different this time around, as we've spoken to many DJs, producers and artists on this show. However, this is our first guest who is a famed icon from the world of fashion, a designer whose Wannabe loafer was the dance floor footwear of choice for many of our listeners, I'm sure. Our guest is now a resident of the White Isle of Ibiza and is the visionary behind new fashion brand Doors of Perception. It's the one and only Patrick Cox. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's quite an intro.
You've done so much, you deserve that. Well, welcome. We always start at the beginning on the show, as we were just talking before the mics went on. You know, you grew up in Canada, you moved around a bit in those early years. You spent time in Cameroon, Nigeria and Chad as a young boy. What kind of household was it like growing up when you were moving around that much, and what was that kind of musical education like?
Well, as you said, I'm born in Canada, Edmonton, Alberta, which is, without being mean, a cultural wasteland. So my father was from the East End of London. My mother's Canadian, but both her parents are British. So I'm first generation, immigrant sort of thing. I sound like this. I don't know why. I sound like I'm from LA. It's really quite bizarre because I only lived in Canada about 10 years of my life, and I lived in London 35 years, and I live in Ibiza now 7 years. But hey, it is what it is. My father was a linguist and he worked for the Canadian government. He wasn't a diplomat. And we moved to Nigeria, to Lagos, when I was 2. And we lived there for several years. Unfortunately, the Biafran War broke out. So we left there and we moved to Chad. Mm-hmm. We lived there for a year, moved back to Canada, then moved back to Cameroon, stayed a year in Cameroon. And my mother by that point had enough. She just wanted to be a Canadian housewife. She didn't want to deal with genocide and civil war and, strange tropical diseases. So she left my father, and me and my brother flew back to Canada at the age of 8. And we didn't travel that much more. You know how you see people kind of go different ways in the 60s? So you see a picture of my mum and dad's wedding, and he looks like an original Beatles. He's in a really skinny suit with a really skinny tie, and he couldn't look more British. And my mum looks like sort of a prom queen from the 50s. She's got like a poodle dress and cat's eye glasses and a beehive hair. Yeah. Cut to my dad moving to Africa and, God bless him, discovering weed and becoming a hippie and everything. So the music we heard at home, besides hearing a lot of high life, which is Nigerian music, because that was just booming and playing everywhere you went sort of thing, my dad was into the Beatles, the Stones, Santana, a bit of Bob Marley, that sort of thing. So I had that going on while my mum was, not being mean, probably listening to Doors Day. There was definitely a dichotomy at home. And then when we went on holiday, when you would leave, when you're in a posting in Africa, and you leave to get away from the heat, we wouldn't fly all the way back to Canada. We would fly to London because my father's one whole side of his family lived in the East End. They actually all now live in Grays, Essex. So I'm an Essex lad, somewhere deep down at heart, bizarrely. And my memories then are of, what was playing on the radio and everything. So it was a lot of Donny Osmond every time we came. And I think we mentioned it just before we started recording, that song Popcorn.
Yes.
Diddle-dum, was kind of playing everywhere. So I had that sort of in my mind, I guess, as a child. Childhood memories that are really important from them, being that I'm a shoe designer. In Nigeria was exotic skin shoes. All the petrodollar local African chiefs and things like that always had snakeskin, crocodile, lizard shoes on. And if you remember, my most best-selling iconic Wannabe loafer was in snakeskin. So that's me referencing my childhood. And then childhood memories from London, it was the age of the platform. I remember going to Bibo with my mom, and I just remember reading articles about all these women falling down the tube station stairs because they were wearing these giant platforms. And when you're 4, 5, 6 and you're taking the tube and traveling around London, you're looking at platform shoes all day long. There's not a lot. You're not looking up girls' mini skirts. Well, I was gay, so I certainly wasn't looking up girls' mini skirts. I was 4, so maybe that was a bit early to say that. But I was noticing platform shoes freaking everywhere. So as soon as I could, one of the first shoes I designed for Vivienne Westwood when I eventually came to London and everything was a platform shoe, and I've always had a soft spot for platform shoes. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of ABBA. Yeah. And a lot of Elton John probably too. All of that sort of, glam rock. Yeah. All those things that to a little boy were like, wow. Yeah. So I guess those are the influences. And then going back to Canada, then you're stuck in Siberia. I'd love to say that I listened to Bowie. Bowie didn't make it to Western Canada.
Oh,
I didn't know who Bowie was till much, much, much later. Roxy music, all the things that I loved later, I had no idea what they were.
Yeah.
So a lot of rock. I was a huge Kiss fan. I was in the Kiss army. Again, there's platform boots in there.
Yeah. Was the makeup making an
the
impact
makeup, the boots, the just everything.
Yeah.
The theatricality of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, Queen did make it because nobody knew he was gay back then, so they tolerated it and played it on the radio way back then. And then Motown. And as soon as anything could shift to a more black perspective, I was much more interested.
Yeah.
But I mean, even the Carpenters, ABBA, we're talking 70s FM radio, so we kind of had it all playing. But as soon as I could be in charge of choosing music, I think one of the first things I bought was Bob Marley, and then it very quickly. My older brother's gay also. He's 2 years above me. So he brought like a Donna Summer record into the house when I was probably 13. Yeah. When disco hit, and then boom. From 1976 on, it was, that's all I wanted.
Yeah. And I mean, like at that young age as well, when you're growing up and you say cultural wasteland, Siberia of Canada.
Sorry, Canada.
Sorry to any Canadians listening. But, and then disco hit and you're still in that part of the world. Were you then going out and discovering club life at that point as well? Were you old enough to go out? And do that?
I'm 61 now, so 1976 I was 13. So I did start sneaking out to clubs by the age of 15. There was one gay club called Flashback in Edmonton, and my brother introduced me at the door as his younger brother, and they knew he'd just become legal, so they kind of made me stand outside for several months, and I would just talk to the doorman and things like that, and I had an 11 o'clock curfew, so it was not like it was whatever. I would arrive at 9 when the doors of the club would open, and I would stand outside, and eventually they let me in. I would score something, normally acid or speed or whatever the hell they sold way back then. But then I had 11 o'clock curfew, so normally I'd be driving home just when it was hitting. Whatever I'd taken was hitting, and then sitting in my bed going, alone, listening with headsets on. Lot of teenage angst. So Chicago, If You Leave Me Now, You'll Take Away the Rest. I mean, I must have cried for 3 years to that record, alone in my bedroom with the headset, trying to be quiet so my mom wouldn't hear me outside the door, whatever. A lot of teenage angst. But disco became my thing. We didn't have the Top of the Pops. In Canada, we had an American Bandstand. And American Bandstand, from being pop and, whatever it was, and very sort of California, Beach Boys, all that sort of stuff, went full on disco, and the Solid Gold Dancers on the Solid Gold show, and I would be every Saturday morning downstairs in the basement dancing in front of the TV on my own, and that is my formative memories are all about that. Everything with a beat, and the shoes and the outfits, and just the whole package.
Always filtered through a fashion.
And that was it. You couldn't really see it anywhere else but on TV. The homophobia hadn't kicked in. They hadn't had the Disco Sucks movement yet. So everything was cool. At high school dances, I would get everyone doing the bus stop or the hustle or things like that I'd learned off TV. And I wasn't ostracized yet. By the time I got to later in school, then it was like, faggot, you listen to that music, faggot, and like, oh, why don't you listen to this? And why don't you listen to Edgar Winter Group? And I think number one on the New Year's Eve countdown, Stairway to Heaven was number one for a decade. I mean, I was just like, I can't listen to that song. That and Hotel California, if I hear two notes, I'm like, I'm out the door. Because it just represents oppression, homophobia, just, suppressing anything different and new, everybody conforming. To school, I had to wear flare bootleg, either Levi or GWG jeans, and a plaid shirt, or maybe some sort of t-shirt, anything else, just to make it out of school alive. I mean, the last day of school, I wore skinny leg jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt. and I barely made it out of this place alive.
Wow.
And I had shorter hair, and the only way I got away with it, instead of having long hockey hair, which is a mullet, was by saying that I was a cadet. So everyone thought I was doing something military or whatever after school. So, otherwise, yes.
Wow.
Not a very...
So you were happy to get out of there, and you obviously moved to London to study like in the early 80s. So you were how old at that point?
Well, first of all, I moved to Toronto. I moved out of the house at 16. I didn't really get along with my family, to put it mildly, but I've worked on that. We're all good now. And then at the age of 17, I moved to Toronto, and there I fully immersed myself into everything. It was the time of, as we called it then, the second British invasion. So everything was electronic. So it was Spandau Ballet, Culture Club, Duran Duran, the Eurythmics. Everything was British. All the charts were British. And there were clubs that catered to that. One of them was a club called Voodoo that only played electronic music and things like that. And I became the doorman because I was quite a little vision walking down the street at that time. I couldn't afford Vivienne Westwood. Vivienne Westwood was my goddess, but I had pirate outfits and this outfits and the New Romantics, full makeup, all those sort of things. Never drag. It wasn't drag. It was what New Romantics was, what New Romantics were. So I became involved with that, and then a club in Toronto opened called the Twilight Zone, and it played early house. The DJs that played in the house clubs in Chicago played there in Toronto. And it was a black dance club that didn't serve alcohol. It was a juice bar, and it coincided exactly with the arrival of ecstasy in Toronto. Because ecstasy was legal. What do you call it now? Molly? Whatever you call it now. But I still call it ecstasy. Ecstasy was legal till 1987 in North America. Before they made it illegal. They slammed the door on it. So you could buy it. You could, without getting arrested, and if you got caught with it, they'd probably take it off you just to be jerks, not give it back to you. But I had no legal reason to take it off you because it wasn't illegal. And that changed everything. With my clothing range, I have a group that's disco based. And my clothing range is very spiritual, and people go, what does disco have to do with spirituality? And I was like, disco was my salvation. That God was a DJ and the dance floor was my church. As a kid coming from that sort of homophobic environment, that was the only place I felt free, was on the dance floor. So when that whole house music / ecstasy thing hit together, I was in nirvana. I mean, that was just beautiful, just the memories of dancing and everything was mixed. You'd be dancing with a big huge straight Rasta guy, then you'd be dancing with his girlfriend, then you'd be dancing with this. It was just there were no barriers, which is what early house music was about, and what I loved so much about that period. And then after 2 years in Toronto, I was working for a clothing designer. I'd never been to fashion school or anything of the sort, but they liked the way I looked, and they liked the outfits I put together. So he got me involved with styling his fashion show. And this is before the word stylist even existed in fashion. And because I had no training, that involved casting the models, organizing hair and makeup, and the accessories. So Canada has no indigenous footwear business other than like mucklucks for the Native American people or snowmobile boots. I mean, there really is no footwear industry in Canada. So I went to Chinatown, bought these $1 Kung Fu slippers, which you can still get, those really cheap little canvas shoes with a plastic sole. And I customized them, making them into boots that fell down from above your knee and things like that. I was somewhat inspired by two designers, Claude Montana and Thierry Mugler. So it was that kind of look. And after the show, the designer said to me, "You seem to really like doing the shoes." I hadn't noticed, but he said, "You seem to really like doing the shoes." He goes, "I was in London in 1976 when I was a punk, and I heard of this college. Maybe you should go there." And the only thing I heard in that sentence was London. So May 1983, I came to London to find the college. I walked down the King's Road, and every store I went into, I made friends with people. Because of the way I looked and the way I dressed and everything like that. And that changed everything. I ended up meeting this girl. She was going out with Rusty Egan, who was in Visage and owned the Camden Palace at the time.
Yep.
And she said, when you come back in September, why don't you live with me and Rusty?
Yeah.
I went every night to the Camden Palace and other clubs like that, and just, was this creature having the most incredible time. Flew back to Toronto, realized I'd been so high and so happy I never found the college. I never actually even looked for it. And I was moving September 1st to go to a school which I hadn't even found yet. So my friends, Haley, and some of her friends found the college, because Cordwainers at the time was unknown. It had been there 100 years, but certainly no one of any fame or note had come out of it.
Yeah.
They enrolled me. Now, if you wanted to go there, you'd have to have a portfolio, and you'd have had to have foundations and art degrees and, and prove what you were. Then they just took my goddamn money. They were like, "You're foreign," and I was like, "No, I'm actually British." They went, "You're foreign. You give us whatever it was, $3,000 or something insane in 1983." And I moved and went to college.
And what was it like during those early to mid 80s years in London, in terms of the music, the fashion, the people that you were all mixing with?
It was Thatcherism, so it was hard times. So. Not me, very luckily, because of living with Rusty and Haley, one of Rusty Egan's investors owned a whole building in Belgravia, number 9 Chapel Street, right next to the Irish Embassy. Yeah. So some kids were living in parked cars, some kids were living in train stations. Yeah. I was living in a 9-floor mansion in Belgravia, paying 30 quid a week rent, and I sort of not have to make my bed. I would just move to another bedroom, because there only was Rusty, Haley, and me living in this entire house. Yeah. So I just go live in another bedroom, go to another bedroom, and once a week rotate when the cleaner had come in and cleaned all the bedrooms. It was quite weird. I'd get on the tube at Hyde Park Corner, and I'd come up at Bethnal Green, and it was sort of one reality up to Bank Station, and then from Bank on it was a whole other reality, because I know y'all are very excited about Hackney in East London, but let me tell you, it was not cool back then. It was dangerous as fuck, and it was just rows and rows of bombed out buildings. It looked kind of like the South Bronx when you see hip hop movies of the South Bronx. So that was kind of my reality. It was free. Nobody had any money. It cost nothing to get into clubs. Everybody was mixed. There was, fashion designers. You could be standing right next to Boy George or right next to George Michael or something in a club. There was nobody was excited about it. It was all very, very open and fluid. Gay, straight, whatever. The division hadn't occurred. AIDS was just arriving. So that hadn't terrified everyone yet. There was the beginning of Japanese with their cameras taking pictures. They were the first people in clubs with cameras. Was the Japanese kids, the really cool kids. So I was there. I did the first 3-4 months of school. I think I cried every single day, because I was like, I don't understand these people. I don't know how to make friends. I don't understand this culture. It was culture shock.
The culture, as in what, the British culture, or the culture of
British culture
being in a college?
Then there was 2 TV channels. Stores were closed on Saturdays. I mean, I
would cry, to be honest.
Where the hell have I moved to? I would like step back into like some Victorian communist dystopian nightmare after being in Canada, where everything's clean and open and welcome and available, and everything was like, no, you can't do that. No, we're closed. No, you can't do this, and just all these weird things. And then New Year's Eve between 1983, I went to the Camden Palace, and then New Year's Eve between 1983 and 1984, I'd been at the Camden Palace, it closed, and I got into a taxi with a famous designer at the time, who was a friend of mine then, Stephen Linnard, and we went to a speakeasy in Soho called the Pink Pussycat. And at 3 a.m. in the toilets, won't say necessarily what I was doing in those toilets at 3 a.m, the whole Vivienne Westwood team came into the toilet, and they pointed at me and they said, "You're that American boy that shops in our store." And I went, "Canadian, actually." I didn't shop in their store. I hung out because I think I might have bought one scarf, because everything was so expensive back then, for Vivienne was anyway, and nobody had any money. And they said, "You're cool, we like you, you can hang out with us." That might sound really pathetic, but to me, a 20-year-old kid who'd moved from the other side of the world, that was validation, that was acceptance. And Vivienne was 50% of the reason I moved to England. She was my goddess. So her right-hand man was a guy named David Staines, and David... I decided it was time to leave Rusty and Haley's. I'd kind of done enough there. So in January of 84, I moved out, and David needed a flatmate. So I said, move in with me. And he moved in with me. If you know about fashion, that was the moment where Vivienne and Malcolm broke up. So Vivienne kept the company and Malcolm went and did what he did. Malcolm never really designed the clothes, but he was involved with the styling, the music, the message, the accessories, the casting, that sort of thing. And Vivienne got on with the clothes. So 6 weeks before their March 1984 Paris show, they realized they'd forgotten to do the shoes because someone else used to deal with that. And also half the team defected with Malcolm. So it was just David and Vivienne and one other person doing the entire thing sort of thing in the studio. So David said, my flatmate's a shoe designer, not realizing I was in the first year of college and knew nothing. So I went in for a meeting with her, which I was just in awe of her. And she was so encouraging. She had a couple shoes on the table that they had worked on before. Remember her famous three-tongue sneaker, the black, the white one with the square toe. So they'd done a development of that, which was a lot softer. It was round-toed with 3 baby tongues. And I suggested putting a platform on it. And I suggested making it in patent, because I was always about sparkle and glitter. And I suggested rounding the soles, because the shoe was round. And I said it'll make it more like a dolly and more like biting into something like a cookie. I had all these words. And she's like, yeah, get on with it. And then there was another shoe that had a tongue that came up the leg. And again, I did it in patent and I had the platform. She said, yep, get on with it.
So much trust in you as a newbie designer. You know, like you said, you're in your first year, and that
I couldn't draw.
Trust from your idol as well. That must have been incredible.
But that was London there. You had access. You had access. I mean, fashion has always been a little bit who you know. You have to deliver the goods. They're not going to screw up their entire show because they thought you were cute or you thought you were nice. You know, you have to deliver the goods. And I had to deliver goods so much in that Vivienne was broke. I mean, she rode her bike everywhere, not because it was romantic, because she had no money. You know, I worked in the store for free, and we only took cash because we had no credit card machine and we had no telephone line, and we had no power. So at the World's End store, we had to walk around with candles behind the customers to show them what there was, because that was it. I mean, there was nothing, and I worked for free, and I would gladly do it again. I am not moaning. It was the most amazing experience of my life, working for her. And then besides what she'd asked for of my own bullshitness, I designed this pair of platforms, proper platforms, because the ones I'd done for her were maybe an inch high. So it wasn't really a platform. But then I did these ones which were 3 inch high, and they had these big gold knots. I was sort of channeling Minnie Mouse and Ferragamo and, I don't know, Roxy Music or something into these 3 big gold knot platforms. And I took the hovercraft carrying all the shoes over to Paris at my own expense. And I delivered them at like 11 o'clock at night into Vivienne's hotel room where she was holding court, laying in bed with all the clothes all around her. And I showed her the shoes she'd asked for and what I'd done with them, and she loved them. And then I pulled out these 3 pairs of gold platforms that I'd done on my own accord. And she just went silent. And she went, ooh, platforms. How 70s, which has since come back and bit her in the ass many times. That was the first time that Vivienne had ever, I think, been exposed to anything called platforms. So the show was starting. We're backstage. It's over 2 hours late. Jean Krell, who used to work for Vivienne, was like on the mic starting to sing to just people to entertain, which was making people go mad. So people were leaving. We were backstage. The clothes arrived from Italy. They weren't even finished. They actually... But with the clothes, they included rolls of fabric with the pattern paper pinned to it and sewing machines. They were like, fuck you, Vivienne. Make your own bloody clothes. I was running out in the audience, finding people like Stephen Jones to come backstage. I went, can you sew? Can you come backstage and sew? And people were like, so what? I'm like, the clothes. Like, the show's already an hour late. We're like, yeah, can you come backstage and sew? So we did the first outfit for every model, the first passage. And then... people were walking out. So we just threw all the clothes in the middle of the room, a giant pile of clothes, and told the models, when you get off, just tear off your clothes, jump in there, get something together. We'll make sure it's kind of looks right and get back out there. Someone, not me, threw the 3 pair of gold platforms into the pile. And the models ended up fighting for them, and they ended up wearing them. So that was not only the launch of having something that I'd been involved with working for Vivienne, but that was also the debut of actually something I designed, being on a Paris runway. Yeah. And Vivienne even got me to model in the show. I mean, we were backstage, and she was like, "What are you going to wear?" I went, "What am I going to wear? Where?" And she goes, "You're modeling." I went, "What?" So I went backstage, giant line of coke, and I went on the runway, stomping down, up and down the runway. And that was the beginning. There was... What clubs do we went to then? Went to White Trash, which was in Piccadilly, and then Taboo. Yeah. I mean, Taboo, Lee Bowery's Taboo was legendary. Yeah. Taboo was every Thursday night, and I had a class every Friday morning called Materials. And I mean, this school was so bizarre back then. I mean, it's changed greatly now, and it's a world-class school, but then it was stuck in some, Victorian hell. It was just so backwards. So instead of saying... you'll go buy some glue, they literally were like, okay, you buy a horse and you boil it and you're going to make your own glue. And I went, when am I ever going to have to make glue? Yeah. I think, don't I just buy it? I mean, but the materials, they told you how to, basically how to raise a cow and kill it to make a shoe. I mean, you were taught everything. Yeah. So I never made it to materials in a whole year, my whole first year. And at the end of the year, the teacher who taught materials caught me in the hallway and he goes, "Who are you? I've never seen you." I said, "I'm Patrick Cox." He goes, "You've never been to my class once." And I was like, "Oh, it's my club called Taboo on Thursday night." And so they were going to fail me. I was like, "Go ahead. I don't care. I've just done the shoes for Vivienne Westwood in Paris. I've already got a career, but fail me." So they made me sit down and do all the year's tests, which I passed, because you'd have to be an idiot to not have passed them. And that was year one at school. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, and you mentioned Taboo as well. Like, just take us through. Obviously, it's so famous and iconic. Take us through what it was like in there for someone that was, participating in all that.
Bacchanalia. I mean, it was like nothing you've ever seen. Just the arriving when you got out of your taxi or the tube at Leicester Square, and then you started to get towards the door, and they would just see all the freaks and all the Japanese and ID magazine doing the street style and everything, and then you'd go straight to the front, because we'd be in some outfit, and Mark would be on the door, and he'd let you in always. He was the one that would have a mirror in his hand, and he'd say, "Would you let you in to someone that was ugly?" I mean, it was so evil, but I never got that evilness because I was part of the team, sort of thing. And then Lee was just, yes, he was mad and the outfits and everything, but he was such a gentleman. He was so kind, and the way he talked, it was just amazing. And then Rachel and what's his name? Bloody hell, I'm going to blank on his name now. Not Jeremy. This is going to really bug me because he played at my 50th birthday party, and I've known him forever. Anyway, he would play, and I think you've heard the stories. They'd play the records backwards. They'd be so high. They'd play just the recording mat. Just the record mat would be played sometimes. Yeah. It was just hilarious. It was camp. Lots of, all the Body Map crew and Michael Clark and all that crew on the dance floor, and just insanity. And it was also the arrival of drugs in London. Yeah. Because when I first went, I think I went to what was it called? Philip Salon's club. The Mud Club.
The Mud Club.
The Mud Club? Yeah. Yeah, and someone handed me a joint, and I ran outside and threw up. And I told my friends in Canada, God, they put heroin in their joints. And then I watched someone roll a joint, and it was like 3 papers long, 4 cigarettes, and the tiniest dusting of the worst hash in the world. I was like, well, no fucking wonder I threw up. I don't smoke cigarettes. I was like, the reason I threw up was not the drug. It was the cigarette. It was like, it was the cigarette, Patrick. And the kids then, no one had money, so I guess people did speed, things like that. And then I guess coke arrived, and then ecstasy arrived. Yeah. So that kind of changed everything. The mood in clubs became much more joyous, much more inclusive. Alcohol can be divisive in clubs. Speed is a bit intense in clubs. But once you've got a loving vibe going in a club, it's just a whole other thing. It was very gay, straight, black, white, whatever. It really, really, really didn't matter. And super creative. It was all the kids from St. Martin's, because they were only up the road, coming down there. And it was just so freaking English. It was just, to me, that's where I felt, okay, now I get why I moved here. Yeah. Because I was suffering a little bit in the beginning. And then it was, just joyous. Yeah, that's good to hear. Everybody became famous, already all the Blitz Kid clubs, from Steve Strange on, they all became famous. But then that whole wave. Photographers, art directors. That's where I met John Galliano. We ended up doing the shoes for several years. That's where I met so many people, photographers, whatever. Normally in the toilet.
Ground zero for so much. Yeah, absolutely.
And accessible. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't drink then, but I think a beer was £1 or something like that. So I loved it. And there was just a whole period of clubbing that just grew. And then it evolved into house music. Well, before that, in 1984, I met Peter Edge, who was a music executive at Chrysalis at the time. And then he launched Cool Tempo Records. Yeah. And then he eventually changed that to something else and ended up going to Warner Brothers. But he was signing house music acts. Yeah. And before kind of anybody was, sort of thing. So it was weird that I had access to all of that black dance music. So DJs would come back to my house and be like, what? Like, they look at the record collection, I was like, it's not mine. We're just here for the drugs. That's my boyfriend who's asleep. That's his, you know. And then I went to, I went to Trip in the Astoria. I went to what was the one, Spectrum at Heaven. Yeah. But then I got taken by someone to Shum in Southwark in the fitness center. Yeah. And that was just a whole revelation. Yeah. And it was another ecstasy moment of my life. It was like the third wave of ecstasy. Yeah. But to these kids, mostly from South London suburbia, you know, Chislehurst, Bromley, Sevenoaks, all that sort of thing. That's where all those kids were from. They were suburbia. Yeah. It was the revenge of the suburbs. Yeah. Everyone was like pissed off with West End designers, as they called us, and things like that. But it was just amazing. And just drenched, pouring with sweat. Yeah, I mean, the ceiling that high. Yeah. Fog. There was no fog machine. It was just sweat and steam. Yeah. And the record would every now and then if something went wrong and whatever. And it was just beautiful. I became very close with Jenny and Danny, Rampling. Yeah. They'd come back to my house and they'd go, fuck, look at this record collection sort of thing. And it was a really free time. We did some of the, you know, M25, driving around a car, going to find the party, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. And for most of the kids, I remember this, I was sitting on the floor at the Astoria and I tripped over this kid and I looked down and I said, and I just started. And so this is 86 or 87. I finished college in 85. And I said, those are my shoes. And he was such a little, we go, no, they're not. I bought them. I've got a receipt. And I'm like, no, mate, I'm not saying you stole my shoes. I drew those shoes. I went, what's the label? He goes, something like Patrick Cox. Like, that's me. And he was looking at me like very like suspicious, like I bought them. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not being, you know.
That's awesome. And, we often speak to, you know, obviously at the top of this we were talking that you know, it's often DJs and producers and people who are making music, and one of the questions always asked sometimes is, you know, what was it like hearing your song on the radio for the first time or something like that? And this was your moment of seeing your work out there in the wild. Yeah.
My first moment of seeing my shoes. In my first year of college, I designed one, again, platform shoe for this Japanese company called Obscure Desires of the Bourgeoisie. And I sent them a sketch. They sent me £100 by bank transfer, and I never thought about it again. They hired me because I'd worked for Vivienne, so they thought it was cool. And then, do you remember Kinky Gerlinky and Michael Costa from Galinda Costa? Yeah. So I loved Mike and Galinda. They were legendary in London and huge in doing what is now Overground, the whole drag and trans and mixing it all together, and, you know, fashion shows and all of that. And Gerlinda came up to me in Taboo, where you could not see the floor because it was pitch black and so crowded. She goes like, darling, you've got to see these shoes. They're fucking fantastic. I bought them in Tokyo. You've got to see them. And she drags me over. I'm high on my mind going, where is she taking me now? Where is she taking me? We find a spotlight. She lifts up the shoes. And it was the shoe I designed for ODOB. And I went, I drew that. Is that ODOB? She goes, how do you know? ODOB? And I'm like, Obscure Desires of the Bourgeoisie. And I'm like, I drew that. And that was my first wow moment. I mean, the Vivienne Westwood runway, that one. And then falling over this kid that thought I was accusing him of stealing from me.
Gregory, you have well and truly arrived. You know, like starting as you mean to go on, like throughout the 90s, obviously your career, massively blew up. You opened a store in Sloane Square, and the Wannabe loafer, it was everywhere in the 90s. It was the shoe to wear for the discerning person who's interested in high fashion. Obviously the party scene in London during that era in the 90s, I think I read that Janet Jackson described you as Party Pat. Yeah. So, how you were obviously living the life during that time. I mean, just what was a typical day like during that 90s era?
Well, I always say if someone else, like a nameless Italian brand or something, had designed the Wannabe loafer, it would have been like, and disappeared. But I was living the Wannabe lifestyle. It was very aspirational, the 90s. Everybody was out there making money and doing things, and it was cool Britannia, and there was the Oasis kids and the Blur and all of that sort of stuff, and Pulp, and it was just a whole, and dance music powering through all of it. So I think people identified with it. At one point, that my shoes became so ubiquitous on the dance floor that I think it was Arena magazine reviewed clubs by how many wannabes you saw on the dance floor. And if it was a cool club, it was like a sea of wannabes, and it was like, oh, don't go here, everyone's wearing the fake M&S ones. That was kind of the review. It became, you got to remember still, because there was this anti-black thing started to sneak into clubs, and the way to keep an urban person out was saying no sneakers.
Of course, yeah.
So you weren't allowed sneakers in all the clubs, and why were they saying that? Because they were trying to stop black people from coming to clubs. Let's be really fucking honest. It was racist. So everybody on the dance floor started to wear wannabes. It became a thing, and also they were really fucking comfortable. That was the point. You could dance the whole night away. So it became part of that dance culture. Bigger than I ever realized. It was only later, because I wasn't really into UK garage, because it was more East London. It was a different thing, and it was more black compared to the clubs that I was going to, which still had that enforcement of no sneakers and sort of things like that. So it was only later that I realized how big I was in that community.
And that
it was a uniform.
That scene, it was a uniform.
Yeah.
And, you had to it was almost a bit reactionary to getting dressed down. It was like people were really getting dressed down.
Yeah, they would call it. I mean, it's Moschino, but they would say they're wearing Moschino and your Yves Saint Laurent, and they would call them your Pat C's. And I was called that. I was like, I'm a what? And one of my cousins in Essex ran a mobile DJ at the time, and he was like, you know how I dine out that you are my cousin? And he goes, nobody believes it, because your name's Cox and theirs is Jackson or whatever the hell their name is. But he said, I've downed out so much on that you're my brother sort of thing. My cousin. I worked so hard. I partied so hard. But normally Monday to Friday I was in Italy working, speaking Italian fluently eventually, dreaming in Italian, because for about 20 years I spoke more Italian than English, if I'm really, really honest. There are words, especially in the footwear world, which I don't know in English to this day, because I've never said them in English. And when I tried to deal with someone in English, I was like, fuck, what's that? What? I don't know. And they look at me like I'm being pretentious, like, I've never said this word in English. It's, so I worked really hard, and then I'd land Friday night and be high within minutes of landing, and then off we go into the night to wherever we were going. There was more clubs like Noble Rot, there was the Light Bar, there was the Met Bar. I wasn't the guy sitting at the table just hoovering, I danced. I always danced. And I would always come back to the table pouring with sweat, and everybody would go, ew! Because after the explosion of house music, and dance culture in 87 and the Summer of Love and everything, then everybody dressed down, and everything was, unisex. You couldn't tell the boys and girls. They all had long hair. They all wore baggy clothes, and everybody was covered in sweat. So that ended, and then people dressed up more and more and more as a reaction to those times, and people became more and more affluent. This is quite funny, but I guess Wannabe, and a lot of people would associate my name probably more with men's shoes or a masculine style of shoe. And people, I said it in an interview, they're like, what do you attribute to your success to? I was like, footballers and drug dealers. And they're like, what? And I was like, if you left London, there was no fashion except for footballers and drug dealers. I said, there was one client, Choice, who was in Bluewater. He was in Essex. He had 3 locations in Essex. and he bought 10,000 pairs of the same classic Wannabe loafers in black leather every time. And I was like, what do you do with these? He went, court appearances.
No way.
I was like, what? He goes, court appearances. He goes, you're facing getting banged up, you get a new suit, you pay Paul Smith suit, you put your Pat C's on, you go to court. I'm like, wow. Okay. Literally villains run my life. I mean, we used to get, the trucks came in from Italy, cross the border, but somewhere in South London the trucks would go missing. The entire truck would be stolen with our new delivery of stuff. I mean, it was quite insane. I got to know through London nightclubs, as you do, some sort of villain-esque sort of people, London gangsters and that whatnot. And I was complaining in a club about this truck going missing, and my friend goes, do you want me to look into that? I'm like, what? And he called me the next morning. So my mum's found them. They're on a market in where the heck is it? Lewisham. They're on a market, or they're on a market or New Cross or Lewisham. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, do you want us to get them back? And I said, well, how would you do that? And he said, well, we'll go up and we'll go, we're the Morgans and these are our mate's shoes and we're taking them back. And I went, you know what? I said, there's already been an insurance claim. I said, for me to call the insurance company and go, hey, we got them back. I'd have to explain how we got them back. And that would probably get me in more trouble. So I just said, fair cop. They nicked them. They got them.
Wow.
We got paid, whatever. But it was quite a wild time. I remember one guy came in the store, spent a good hour trying on shoes, discussing options, then went out, put a motorcycle helmet and came back in with a knife. And we're like, dude, we know you. You've been here for like an hour. Put the shoes in the box. We're like, but we know you. You were just here. You're on camera without the helmet.
Incredible. I mean, what absolute wild times in the 90s as well. And, I'm thinking I want to talk about Ibiza as well, because obviously that's where you live now. Obviously during this time in the 90s, you must have had experiences in Ibiza.
My first Ibiza trip was 1991. I had been on a friend's big boat in Sardinia, and they said, we're moving the boat to Ibiza. I'm like, okay. And we arrived at Ibiza in the port, and they're like, you go get the drugs. I was like, I've never been here before. And they're like, yeah. They just like me, And so I got a number and I met a guy and he's like, Patrick! And he'd been in my living room because my house where I lived 17 years just a block away from where we are in Notting Hill on Linden Gardens, became like house music central. It became clubbing central. The poor neighbors. I mean, I just feel dreadful if any of you are still alive and you're listening to this from what I subjected you to for 17 years. But I remember once being in a nightclub, in a toilet, actually peeing, and hearing people outside going, this is shit, this is shit. I'm going to go to 55 Linden Gardens. I'm going to go, let's go to 55. That was my address, and I didn't know these two guys. And so I got outside, and I called my neighbor. He goes, Patrick, there's 100 people in the road. There's cars everywhere. You've got to get back. And I was like, I'm not going to go home at all. So there was an open door in my house, and people just come in, and it was, just a time very free and lots of fun. But so he'd been there. This guy had been one of these people in my flat. So, he hooked me up, and the rest is history. I spent about 20 years going to Ibiza from 1991 to about 2000, maybe 15 years. Always in the south. Always high. The dealer meets you at the airport. You've had a line before you're even in the car, getting to your villa or whatever. Dancing for 96 hours. Not eating, because I never went to restaurants in Ibiza. Every 2 days, we'd drive to McDonald's, eat 3 burgers, whatever, because we were actually not high, and then get high again immediately and go back out and be in space, 20 hours or something. They close to clean, once every 23 hours, and then DC-10 and Amnesia and all those sort of places, and just dance. I was never promiscuous. I wasn't really, having sex or doing any of that because I just wanted to dance. I just wanted to dance the whole time. I wasn't networking. I wasn't having conversations in the corner. I was on the dance floor the entire night. That's what my be all and end all was. And I heard about the legendary North, and I thought it was like 7 hours away. I didn't realize it was 20 minutes away. I'd never been Ibiza town and all the way towards San Jose, that side.
Yeah.
I didn't even really go to the beaches because I remember I brought a friend of mine who was from Eastern Europe over, and he landed at night. We danced for 4 days and we left on the same flight. He was coming back to England during the day, and he looked out the window and he goes, "It's an island. There's beaches." I'd never taken him down. And I was like, oh, they're overrated. I'd never been to the beach. I didn't care about the beach. I went on beach holidays, but I didn't go to Ibiza for a beach holiday.
Yeah.
I went to Ibiza to dance nonstop the whole time.
Yeah.
And then I stopped going because I got a little older and demands from my company and just partying a lot less. And it was a lot less ecstasy and more just coke. So, you just sit around and do coke. You don't really go dancing. You just sit around.
Yeah.
And chat and hear everybody's life stories endlessly. And that was the weirdness that happened at the end of Britpop, that happened at segging into 2000. Things got more cokey and a lot less dancey for a while there. There was drum and bass, which I quite liked, but that was... that was kind of that vibe too. It wasn't quite as loved up, as you'll see from my music selection later. I need vocals. I need, some black diva or some gay man wailing. I need pianos. I need, some real instrumentation as well as electronic, but I need that. And just does nothing for me. Nothing for me at all. So I'd stopped going, and then in let's say 2012, 13, 14, some of my straight married friends started buying houses more in the north, and I came and visited them, and I was like, oh my God, this place is beautiful. Oh my God, look at these beaches. Oh my God, there's really good restaurants. Things I'd never done. I just never, that wasn't my reality. And then things in London, I lost my company and my name in 2007, had some investors that turned hostile and ended up being turfed out of my own company. They ended up winding it up within a year, so fuck you. And struggled for meaning, tried to do various things, worked for other big brands, opened a cupcake shop in Soho. Called Cox Cookies and Cake. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was an old sex store. We did titty cakes and ass cakes and cock cakes and things like that. The reason behind that is the one bonding experience I used to have as a child with my mom was every Saturday morning she'd wake up early and bake. And I was a morning person. I've always been a morning person. So I would be up with her at 6 a.m. on Saturday, and she'd be making brownies and chocolate chip cookies and this Canadian thing called Nanaimo bars. And I'd be licking the mixer, those things, and licking the bowl and everything. And that was a big bonding moment. Everyone... My mum used to send me terrible presents from Western Canada, things like this. And I just said, Mom, stop sending me these presents. I just literally give them to a charity shop. I said, I know you want to do something. I said, but it has nothing to do with my life, these presents. I said, just save your money. Just don't do it. She goes, I have to give you something. And I went, bake. I said, that's my favorite thing. So once a year, and then it became twice a year, Christmas and birthday, my mum would bake and send over this care package of cookies and whatever, and it got out. So people would be like, isn't your birthday soon? They thought the fucking cookies are coming. It had nothing to do with I want to buy you a present if the cookies are coming. And like, it's Christmas. Did your mom send those Nanaimo bar things? And all these boys, normally male models, all these guys be at my house like eating all these cookies. And so then I just decided, okay, I'm going to do that. A friend of mine, Jamie Polton, his dad was in the porn business. He owned all the porn stores in Soho, and one of the stores was closing because with the advent of the internet, people wanked online. They didn't need to come into Soho and buy a book and wank in the basement. They just stay home and wank online. So the empire was starting to shift to restaurants and other things. And he said, I wish you could do something with that store. It was right in front of his office. It breaks my heart. And he's like, why didn't you open a shoe store? It was, obviously I'd lost my name. And I said, I don't think... I was wrong then. I was like, I don't think Soho's ready for a $300, 300-pound shoe. Now Soho is only men's fashion, but then it certainly wasn't. And I said, what about our bakery idea? And Cox Cook. I mean, my whole life I've been made fun of because my name is Cox. You know, when you're a gay teen, well, preteen, Patrick sucks cocks, Patrick eats cocks. You know, ha 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 ha. Haven't heard that before. So I wanted to call it Cox Cookies and Cakes because cookies is slang for balls and cake is slang for fanny. So it was like Dick Balls and Fanny was the name of my store essentially. And we did all these rude cakes, and Tracy Emin did a neon for me, and the store was all black with neon, just mimicking all the other sex stores in Soho. The staff wore studded leather aprons and the boys wore no shirts, and it looked like a sex store. I mean, people would stand at the door going, what is that? Like, I see cupcakes, but not like anything I've ever seen. So I did that. It was probably a cry for help. I was partying too much and I really did not know what my future was. There's this famous saying, life is in 2 acts. And it's all about surviving the intermission. So from 2007, when I lost my name, to 2017, when I moved to Ibiza, that was a 10-year fucking intermission where I just could not get past the glory of being Patrick Cox and figure out what was next. And it got dark. I ended up, suicidal and not really knowing what to do. And I ended up in rehab, not for drugs, but for just depression. I just couldn't figure out what to do next. So moving to Ibiza, once all my straight friends had started to move there and had beautiful homes and everything, I thought, I'm going to do this. So I literally, on my 50, I don't know what birthday, threw a party in my house because I always was quite legendary for my parties. And I said, the house you're standing in is sold. I turned off the music and I'm moving to Ibiza. And everybody just turned to each other and went, what the fuck is he on now? I mean, what? And I did. I moved and the wheels came off. Without the success, even without the success, without the noise and distractions of London, to be alone in a field in the winter months in Ibiza. Winter in Ibiza, it's better now, but it used to be quite cut off. One flight a day, if that, and most of the restaurants, all the clubs closed and everything. It's kind of like therapy. So if you're on your own, you're gonna think about everything. You've got a lot of time to ruminate, which I'd always avoided because I was running for the demons of my childhood and all these sort of things. And so then all of a sudden I realized I didn't know myself, and what I did know I didn't like at all. And everyone, very kindly would come up to you and say something about Patrick Cox. And I was like, he's dead, okay? I was never rude to anyone, but I just felt like living in the past. It was always referring to some mythical glory period, which was gone. And I tried several
not knowing times. What you're going to be doing next, I suppose.
And then my middle name is Lathbridge. My full name is Patrick Lathbridge Cox. So I launched Lathbridge shoes in about 2014 for about 3 years. And if I didn't enjoy my career at the end when I was at the top, I certainly didn't enjoy it when I was number 3,000 on the list. When it was just like, oh, okay, who are you? And aren't you making millions of pairs? No, I'm making dozens of pairs of shoes now. Like, oh, back of the queue, or sorry, we don't want you. Fashion can be very cruel. They don't tell you you're out; they just fucking ignore you. You're feted or forgotten. It's just, instantly from being one of the biggest advertisers with Condé Nast in England, within 6 months of losing the company, I wasn't invited to Vogue parties.
Wow.
I'm like, wait a minute, what?
Brutal.
What? It's and that can really play on you. If you already got insecurities, from being a gay person and the fashion world, the way it preys on homosexual men to a certain extent. It makes women want to be anorexic and makes gay men want to kill themselves. big overgeneralization there, but I'm in a role now. And so I moved there, and things went wrong. Friends got organized to get me off the island for rehab. Came back, my dog died. I moved with my 2 beloved English bulldogs, Brutus and Caesar, and Brutus dropped dead at the age of 7. We think he got stung by something he was allergic to. And that's what snapped me, and I went to rehab. And I came back, I still had a dead dog. I was still being ripped off by my builder. I was still being ripped off by the architect. And I was like, and one of my new friends in Ibiza said, would you like to try microdosing? And I said, my acid days were like when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, when you couldn't get anything else in Canada before everything else arrived. So I tried microdosing. It worked. I'd been on antidepressants, but I'd stopped them before going into rehab because it was part of the rehab. And then I started doing that, and it was working mood level wise, but I've got kind of a sensitive stomach, and it was just gurgling, and it wasn't happy. And then in May 2019, this friend who'd introduced me to doing the microdosing, she said, there's a practitioner flying in from Los Angeles and she's serving toad. Would you like to be part of this small group that's doing this?
Yeah.
I'd already tried to be part of ayahuasca circles, but because I was on antidepressants, I wasn't allowed to, because you can't miss SSRIs with tryptamines. It can be death, serotonin shock. So I'd never done it yet, and everyone had told me like toad was the Mount Everest of psychedelics, and I was like, that's just me, jump in at the deep end. that just makes sense to me, and I'm going to do it. I knew what I was doing, but I didn't want to go too deep into it because I didn't want expectations. I had the ceremony, and my life changed completely in that 20 minutes. I call my life pre-toad and post-toad. I had a gray filter to my reality. Nothing got through it. There was no joy. I used to call Ibiza this motherfucking rock in the fucking Mediterranean. It's fucking killed my fucking dog. Why the fuck did I move here? I would just sit at home and cry all day long. And I would call it exiting. I just didn't want to be on this planet anymore. And I was actually making plans of how to kill myself and take my bulldog with me. Because it was like, I can't leave him here. So I was like, making plans and doing all this sort of stuff and everything. And that all just ended. And I sat up, and I was just so grateful to be alive. And I looked up and I said, was the sky always this blue? Were the trees always this green? I never noticed. It was just this gray place that I lived, Ibiza. I hadn't noticed. And on Instagram, when people wrote #gratitude, I was like, what the fuck do they have to be so grateful for? And all of a sudden I got it, and I was just so grateful to be alive, so grateful for the life I've had, so grateful for where I was. And I realized that everything bad that had ever happened to me in my life led to this moment, and this moment is perfect. So no more anger for my childhood, no more anger for person who stole my company, no more anger for whatever, Vogue binding me, all those stupid things, no more anger. Just this moment is perfect. I'm so lucky. I'm so grateful. Nothing fundamentally changed. I still had a dead dog and I was still being ripped off by my architect and builder, but my focus and my emphasis changed completely. So much so that I went back home. I'm quite covered up normally. I've got body dysmorphia and things like that from my childhood. And I was walking around my land naked and on the phone with someone going, I love Ibiza and I love my life. And they're like, you're high. And I'm like, no, I was 3 days ago for 10 minutes. I said, and that's 5 years ago.
Wow.
And I still live in that place. I still live in that place in my heart. And I work with people and try to, show them that experience and help people heal themselves. I'm not a shaman. I'm not nothing of the sort. You heal yourself. I'm just someone there to help you create a safe space around you. And it's beautiful work, and I mean that's why I'm here in London as we're talking.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, moving on to, we were talking before the mics came on. You are seen as somewhat of an expert now because of your experiences over the past few years. Just tell us why you're here in London and what you've been doing and participating in.
Well, so it's the Sonoran desert toad. It's the biggest land toad in the Americas. It's 5 to 7 inches across its back. It lives in the Sonoran Desert, which is in northern Mexico. They even cross the border into New Mexico, California, and Arizona. It has glands on its shoulders and on its forearms. And when you squeeze these glands, it secretes a venom, which would kill a coyote or a cat that was trying to attack the toad. But you squeeze the glands onto glass, you dry that in the sun, and you smoke that. And within that is 5-MeO-DMT, and it's referred to as the God molecule. It's the strongest psychedelic known to man. I disagree with it being called psychedelic. Psychedelic, the word, has a lot of baggage. People think of hippies throwing themselves out of windows and things like that, and people think of bad trips. Toad isn't very visual compared to, let's say, DMT and ayahuasca or even mushrooms. Toad is extremely experiential. So you smoke this substance, and while you're inhaling, in the 10 seconds you're inhaling, you're already blasting off. And by the time you finish, you don't even know what you've done with the pipe. Someone's there taking care of you and putting the pipe down and everything. And then you lay back, and this experience unfolds. It's like being strapped to the outside of a rocket ship blasting off into space. There's an incredible feeling of acceleration and expansion, and a noise in your ear, a clicking, a roaring noise in your ear. And then you blast off and expand and expand and expand and expand. And then you reach this point of massive expansion, and then you cease to exist. It's a 100% ego death, if you want to talk in technical terms. And at that moment that you cease to exist, you become everything. So you return to source, you return to Gaia, the one, the all. I can use the God word sometimes. I mean, I was a devout atheist. I could make a religious person cry within seconds. I was like Christopher Hitchens Part 2. And when I moved to Ibiza, I was like, if one more fucking hippie says the word energy, I'm going to stab someone. I was like, really, why did I move here? I'm not this person. Yeah. These people are all really getting on my nerves. And now I'll use words energy, and I'll use words like God. When I sat up, the first thing I did was I went, God? I just couldn't understand what I just experienced, and I was like, no. But it's returning to source. It's a blinding white light, the whitest light you've ever seen, and then you become the light. You are the light. You are part of the light. And if you come back, it's just a place of absolute love, you know. I did physics, chemistry, biology, math, French, English in school. I was a SWAT. So to me, you know, I know physics and everything, but for me, when you get to the center of everything, what's there? Love. And that is what powers and runs the universe, as far as I'm concerned. And it's the most accepting place. I call it like a psychic reboot, like unplugging a TV and plugging it back in. So all the programs, all the stories that you've told yourself in your life, or that have been told to you, you're short, you're fat, you're thin, you're unworthy, you're stupid, whatever, your teachers, your parents, whatever they told you, it all falls away. And those voices, not voices like crazy person voices in your head, but that inner dialogue, inner monologue, which in my case constantly told me I wasn't worthy. Even at the peak of my career, I had full-on imposter syndrome. I was just waiting for someone to figure out that I was actually useless. And when I lost the company, I went, see, you deserve that. It was finally... the world caught up with me as far as I was concerned. I mean, how insane is that? You know, I had a company turning over 100 million. I still thought I was a failure, you know, and I couldn't have been more big than I was at that time. But the thing to me that was real was when I lost it all, because that's what it really is. Now we're getting real. Now the world is showing you what you deserve or who you are. And it's just beautiful. You see yourself as a perfect light being, not that you're a perfect light being, everyone's a perfect light being, and then you realize everything is God, because everything is stardust, everything is made out of carbons and molecules from stars. So this is God, that mic is God, everything is God. It's not a man in a white robe giving you jobs and telling you not to do. There are no rules. It's just lead with love, and that just changed everything. And then so I started to make peace with myself, with the island, with my family. I mean, my older gay brother I hadn't spoken to barely since I was 17, and I moved out of the house. We now are friends. My little brother, we're now friends. My mother and I now speak 3 times a week. My dad and I email each other, you know, which we hadn't even emailed in 15 years. So we email each other, you know. I called him on my birthday this year in March. That's the first time we've spoken in over a decade, which was a really big deal. But I realized the one thing I hadn't healed was my relationship to my creativity. And my teacher, who very sadly died in 2022, said to me, he's like, you need to work on this. He goes, because if someone says fashion or shoes, you get up and walk out of the room. He goes, I've watched you do it 100 times. And normally someone's, you know, they're in Ibiza, I'm Patrick Cox, they're high, they're going to come up and give me their Patrick Cox moment. And I'd be like, run. You know, because I just felt like a failure, because I wasn't that Patrick Cox. I was this Patrick Cox. And now I realize I'm much more happy now being this one than that one, because that one was driven by all sorts of other desires and needs, a need for validation. You don't need to like me. Look what Vogue said about me. You don't need to like me. Look how my turnover. You know, I'm in Barney's, I'm in Harrods. You know, all that sort of external validation. I think fashion fed my demons. I didn't know, and this isn't a sob story. I had a fucking amazing life until I didn't. And then I was lost. until the toad found me and showed me what it was. So I decided I wanted to do something that involved spirituality, talked about psychedelics, talked about wellness, talked about my journey, but was also done on the island. Because my entire life, as I told you before, I flew to Italy and came back. I flew to Japan and came back. And there was just this huge disconnection in my life. And I didn't want disconnection. I wanted connection. So I designed this first sweatshirt that had 40 eyes on it. I got it made by someone in England, but then he wanted some insane price, like 2,000 euros per sweatshirt. I went, whoa, okay, that's not what we're doing. And then I went to the Las Dahlias hippie market in Ibiza, and I came on this stand of this woman, Nieves, who's been on the island her whole life. Her parents moved there in the 70s, and she has an embroidery business, and she's doing cushions with like lizards and esvedra and things on it for the tourist trade. And so I said, can I have a meeting with you? So I went to her place and I showed her the sweatshirt. She loved it. We worked out a price. I mean, it's 40 hours of embroidery per garment. Wow. 20 colors of thread. It's not basic stuff. No. And I ordered 80 because she said I needed to order 80 minimum in order to pay for her to do the CAD cams because there was an investment to be made. And I had it all ready, and I was sitting on it like October, November. And then in early December, I told some friends, and they're like, I'm going to launch in the new year. They went, have you ever heard of this thing called Christmas? They said, if you wait till December 26th, I'll buy one. But if you get it ready before Christmas, I'll buy 3, 4, 5 or something like that. So I created a website for 3,000 euros with some girl that I met in Paris and launched. And then one of my dearest, best friends is Elizabeth Hurley, and I spend every Christmas for 20 years. She's my family. She's my sister. Spent every Christmas for 20 years with her. So I went up to her place for Christmas that year, and I gave her a sweatshirt as a Christmas present. And she goes, 1 minute. She went upstairs, took off all her clothes, wore the sweatshirt, took a picture, post that. And I was like,
bang.
And I posted it, and I went from I think I had 40 followers to 800 followers over the Christmas holidays, because everyone's at home on December 26th. They're all reading the papers, and it was picked up in the Daily Mail, obviously, and You and Hello and I don't know, whatever. Everybody did this. So that was kind of the launch. The name of the brand is Doors of Perception, from the famous Aldous Huxley book, and it was all about me opening the doors of perception and having the same life, but just being able to see it in a new, positive way.
Yeah, it's been incredible watching that journey grow on social media as well, and the different things that you're doing, and you were in LA and a pop-up and doing things like that. It seems to, you've mentioned about how you fell out of love with that creative side of yourself, and now it's wonderful to see you re-embrace it, all based on this kind of rebirth that the Toad is giving you. You can just think it's a really cool sweatshirt and buy it for that reason. But if you want to go a little bit deeper, I don't like the word psychedelic, as I said before. I preferred the word entheogen. With the legalization movement in America, they tried to use the word entheogen a lot. And entheogen comes from the Greek to reveal the God within. So we're not talking about people dancing, at Glastonbury in a festival, tripping on mushrooms, which is beautiful. But we're talking more about a true mystical experience. We're talking about ceremony. We're talking about healing, and that's my emphasis on what I want out of this community and my position within it. And then I came out of the psychedelic closet. That's twice I've come out. In this big article in The Guardian a few years ago. I had a couple friends going, what are you doing? You were the shoe guy. Now you're going to be the frickin' toad guy forever. And I was like, the shoe guy's dead, baby. The shoe guy's dead. So I'd rather be the toad guy than the nobody guy. I said, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I'm passionate about. This saved my life. This saved my life. So if it can help other people. And after the Guardian article, everyone's like, oh my God, you're mad. You should have done that. You should have done that. And I got a letter from someone that saved their life. They'd done this. And they said they just wrote to me. They were in a program and they had to write a letter of gratitude. They wrote it to me. And I just said to my friends, there, one person, one. I don't know how many thousands read the article, but one person. I said, that's all you need. You start with one. What an incredible journey you've had. My God, my mind is completely blown. Thank you for sharing all of that for us, and being so candid about it all. It's been amazing. speaking about journey and just doing a clunky segue here, obviously we've been talking about music and all of your experiences. It's time to talk about your choices in terms of your musical journey for our perfect playlist on Spotify, this is the House Culture Perfect playlist. It's available on Spotify. Every single one of our guests has submitted tracks based on the 5 different themes for this. So it's huge. It's over 35 hours long now, I think. We've done over 70 episodes. So it's a big eclectic tower of eclecticism. We always start off with a catalyst tune, something that kind of got you into electronic music. You have mentioned Popcorn already, and we were talking before the mics came on, weren't we? About you're like, I don't know.
Is it too daft?
Don't worry about it. We can put that one in if you want, but this is much cooler. Obviously, you've chosen where you said anything by these guys, anything by Kraftwerk. We've gone for Trans Europe Express. Like, what's your relationship with that song? Tune?
As a teen, I worked at the local fair that visited, it travels around and visits everybody. It was called the Klondike Days, was the celebration in Edmonton. And on my stall, I think I sold hot dogs. I can't remember what the hell I sold. Next to us was a ski jumping display. And they were the most beautiful men I'd ever seen in my life, part of this. And it was a fake snow thing, and they would do flips and jump and land. And their whole thing was to Kraftwerk. So I'd started to hear it, and I would hear it all the time. And then, Kraftwerk, they invented the machines. They invented everything. They invented the beat. They invented everything. And then when I got into that club in Toronto, the Twilight Zone, I never said the name of it before, the club that played house music, the Twilight Zone, then I heard Afrika Bambaataa and everything that he was doing using all of those samples. Yeah. So all of that period is just so seminal and so important. Yeah. I love that it's both, that it's black music, but it's giving it back to the European guys who invented the instruments and things like that. Yeah. I like the mix of everything. I love Euro disco, Giorgio Moroder and Donna Summer, all that sort of thing. I assumed Donna Summer had been done 500 times, so I didn't go down that road with you. But that would obviously mean I Feel Love would have been a huge one, but I just that's gone for sure. Yeah. Numbers was probably more than Trans Europe Express, just because it was dance. Yeah. It had that Trans Europe Express was a little bit more like a train moving sort of thing. Yeah. But all of that electronic music was just so, you just didn't know what these sounds were and how they were being made.
It still sound so like there's such a crystal clarity to them now when you hear them, and it's that understanding that it's it is decades old now.
And have you ever gone to see them in concert?
I have, yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. I saw them. They were doing a 3D show, so everyone got 3D glasses.
Yeah.
It was
well, I went to a small show at the Brixton Academy, and I went with the Pet Shop Boys, the other electronic duo, and it was so funny. They don't do a lot on stage, and their speakers were about that big. It was a fuck you to the giant wall of speakers. They were just these tiny speakers. The sound was incredible, and just watching Neil, yes, but Chris, there's these 4-man standing like that, and every now and then one went like that, and Chris go, "Ooh," and I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Well, I like the way he did that." I was like, "Wow, you guys really don't move a lot on stage." It's like when you're that minimal and that electronic that is really exciting. Oh, look at that. Oh, I love the way he did that. I was like, okay.
That's hilarious.
So that minimal Euro beat was so key. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And drove from, a Human League, all of them. They all come from there.
Yeah, you can all trace it back.
Yeah, it all comes from there.
Yeah. Okay, a floor filler, you've Break for Love by Raze.
It's just everything I want. It's basic, it's stripped back, it's a beat, it's sexual. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's gay. It's got a black man singing. It's just everything. As soon as that beat starts, it's you
can know it from the beat as well. It's one of those.
It's everything to me. So there are other ones, especially when you get into more house music and everything. But that one it's just, again, it's so stripped back.
Yeah. As all early house music is, it's so simple. Okay, a sunsetter. I love this track. It's Spacer by Sheila B. Devotion.
So a lot of people probably don't know this one, and this is a Nile Rodgers, Bernard Edwards chic production with French pop star Sheila B. Devotion. My friend Kim Jones, who now designs Dior, he used to design Louis Vuitton, and he had Nile Rodgers do the music for a show, and he knew how much Nile Rodgers meant to me, so he had me sit next to Nile Rodgers at the dinner afterwards at Le Palace, and we had a fanboy moment, because he actually knew who the fuck I was and wore my shoes, which I was so blown away, because I just said, I'm gonna bow in front of you here. I said, chic, good times, everything, Sister Sledge. I said, you are the soundtrack from my preteens into whatever. I said, but more than anything, Spacer, Sheila B. Devotion. And he just looked at me like, you know that track? And then he said, back to you, I wore your shoes and and I had these ones. So it was a beautiful, beautiful moment. The whole 25 years that I had my company, that was Patrick's going to be on the dance floor song. So if there was we're at a party and throwing, because I did huge Fashion Week parties and legendary parties all over the place. When that was put on the dance floor, when that record came on, that was a calling to all the staff and everyone. Patrick's on the dance floor. Get to the dance floor now. So I just love it. I love the naffness of the videos where they're like this and the glitter and they're all wearing silver and. The message being a spacer, it's just beautiful. It's
great. It's so good. And there is a version of it which is like 12 minutes long, which has the build.
And then who are the guys that covered it?
There was like a Europop that covered it. Sophie Ellis-Bextor has done a version of that recently as well.
So they all did it, but it's the first one.
Absolutely.
Sheila B.
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
because I was with the French fellow. He goes, Sheila B. I was like, what the fuck is Sheila B? And he's like, Sheila B. I was like, oh yeah, Sheila B.
Okay, a tearjerker. You've chosen a Devotion by Tensity.
Anything they do, all of that Chicago house. I've talked about Promised Land. I talked about all sorts of things. It's just so uplifting. As I said, especially for gay men, the dance floor was church. When I used to go to the Paradise Garage in New York, we didn't talk about New York clubbing. That's a whole other period.
part 2, we'll cover that.
Part 2. But, we used to go to the Paradise Garage. What a revelation. Just the sound system, the music that Larry Levan used to play. I'd be up in the DJ booth. I took Boy George there for his first time ever in 1984. And we're up in the DJ booth with Keith Haring and everything, just looking down on it all. And that's the first time I saw voguing. It was in the Paradise Garage, because those queens would clear the dance floor out. And you get hit in the face by their arms throwing shape. It was like, ooh, get out of the way, the queens are out now. It was, incredible. So all of that, that's why I go out dancing. I don't go out to hear, I don't go out to see everybody with their camera phones at some DJ. In the old days, you didn't know where the DJ was. Who cared? And you see the difference of clubs, everyone dancing, and we were poured with sweat, and now all these Instagram models going like this, and they're not even dancing, and they're holding their camera, and they all look bored. It's like, and I talk to artists, I to Elton or something like that, and I said, what's it like performing sometimes? He goes, it's a sea of cameras. He goes, it's like recording a video. Because before there was an interaction. Of course, there still is someone like Elton and things like that, but you see, there was a Fashion Week party and Cher performed. No one did anything but video the entire thing, and I thought, it must be like doing a rehearsal. You're just it's white light in your face and no one reacting. And I just think,
makes me feel sad.
It was better before, all that wanker stuff. Ibiza used to be better. But I feel sorry for kids with the phones. I'm really glad my childhood and most of my life was pre-telephone. And there's amazing things about the phone. There's amazing things about being able to get a picture and capture the moment. But there's also just living in the fucking moment.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
So to me, Devotion it's just beautiful. It's about love. And his vocals, soaring vocals, and the piano, everything. It's just
amazing choice. Okay, and the last tune, Fade to Grey, Visage.
Well, as I said before, Steve Strange, Vivienne Westwood and Steve Strange were reasons I moved to England. I used to look at him in the cover of the Face magazine or whatever and just go, wow, what is this creation? Met him. He wasn't very nice to me back in the day. I think he saw me as some upstart thing, whatever. But the Camden Palace was huge. But there was a gay club in Toronto called Stages, and every single night they played Fade to Grey. And I was a 19-year-old new romantic wearing turbans and this and that, and I would just be spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning on the dance floor to Fade to Grey. It still gets me. It's just, I mean, you're fading to grey. It's the end of the night, you know. I mean, those are the days when there weren't 17 other after parties to go on to. You actually were getting in a cab and going home at 3 a.m. It wasn't just the beginning as it is nowadays. But it's just beautiful. The talking in French, Princess Julia's in the video. It's just iconic. It just sums up that moment that I missed by, you know, a couple of years, because I think it's 81. And I didn't arrive till 83 into London. But it was, you know, that kid pressed up against the window looking. I was still in Canada going, oh my God, people are living these lives. I've got to get out of here. I've got to be part of that. And I did.
And you did it.
And I did.
Incredible. Right, that was the last tune, and this is the last question before we wrap up. This is obviously the House Culture podcast, and, you know, this is we talk about house culture as, you know, it's not just about music, it's a movement, it's a community, it's about the art, it's about the fashion, it's about the personalities as well. When you think of house culture yourself, what do you see the main tenets of it being in terms of a summation for you?
Black queer people. I'm sorry, but that's what it is, and that's what it was.
And people shouldn't forget that.
Yeah,
you know?
Latin, but Black queer, Puerto Rican. That's what it was. And they were creating a sound and a beat, because, you know, disco had been deemed gay, and disco sucks, and they famously blew up all the records, and then it went underground. It never went away. I never stopped dancing. I never stopped dancing. Everyone's disco's dead. I was like, yeah, they just changed the name, and now it's called frickin' EDM or whatever it's called today. But, you know, because, you know, it's got to appeal to the masses and things like that. But it was celebration. It was celebratory. It was, you know, people that were oppressed, that couldn't be themselves out there, so they could be themselves on the dance floor, and they were inventing a new way to dance, a new way to dress, not even instruments, computers, you know, things like, but a new way to create these sounds. And, you know, before it, you know, people like Black Box had to put a skinny bitch in the video instead of putting the big fat woman that actually sang the record in the video, you know, until before all that happened. You know, it was real, you know. Before you had to make something pretty for a video or whatever you have to make it pretty for today. It's not the video, you just have to for social media. But it was real, and it was a community.
Let's end it there. Thank you so much for taking part in this. It's been amazing.
Thank you.